who I'm just meeting. Guys all had dinner with. He is the orchardist at Peirce Mill, which I have not had the pleasure to visit yet, but you've been there for almost a decade, I understand.
Yeah.
And kind of working to restore what the orchard originally looked like, kind of in that vicinity. And so he's going to give us a overview of that. So we look forward to hearing about it.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. How many people are on the internets?
There's maybe 10 or so.
I just trying to figure out how nervous I should be.
You don't need to be nervous at all.
Just level 10.
Oh, you should go. Level 2.
Level 2. We're level 2.
It's a friendly crowd.
DEFCON 2. It used to be EIRCE, and then in the, I don't know, 70s, 60s, they decided it was IE, and then they realized 20, 30 years ago that it really is EI. But it is spelled both ways. Like there was a Peirce relative, like of the original guy, who did flip it. Mm-hmm. And he went through his life with the other way. Nevertheless, here we are. So my name's Tim Makepeace. I am the self-appointed head orchardist at Peirce Mill. I am running a little mill orchard there that the purpose of it is to recreate a fraction of the orchard that was there 200 years ago. So just a little background. Isaac Peirce and his son Joshua Peirce came from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to DC in 95, somewhere around there, 98. And they bought the land around Peirce Mill. They started a little mill, I think it was a sawmill. And then eventually in 1929, they built the stone mill that's there now in 1829. And his son, who was a botany enthusiast, and the reason I guess I'm here talking to you fine botanists, is so his hero was Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist, I don't have to tell you about, and he named that hill Linnean Hill and the street up there Linnean Avenue or street, or whatever it's called. So he had a nursery at the same time that they were running this mill, and he had this extensive catalog. So not working. Okay. It's working. So here's some just historic photos. 1918 it shows the mill in action with some ladies in their finest and sold motorcycle. That's looking up Tilden. Nice mustachioed men. And then if you were to look sort of 90 degrees to the left is where, which is currently has the Park Service owns this mansion there, the Klingel Mansion. They have offices in there. And that was where the nursery was. And if you look in the distance to the right, in the, I guess I can use the cursor. Can I use the cursor to point? Does that show up here? Can you see the cursor? Yeah, sort of. It's not very good. Anyway, there's a big barn up there. That is gone. But from Tilden Street, if you know the area, to Broad Branch, which is a pretty big area, all the way up to Linnean Street, which encompasses Hillwood Mansion, Hillwood Museum, that was all apple orchard. So I don't know what they grew there, but I do know what they sold in their catalog. This is an interesting photo. This is the artist Peale, his famous artist who did portraits of George Washington, and he got interested in photography. And this is from 1850. That's a very early photo. Very early. And that shows the mill, the barn, And is there a way to make the cursor look like a cursor instead of a crosshair? Well, is there a tool?
No, there's 16 people on right
I'm not sure.
Okay.
at the meeting.
Anyway, it's a
So
cool.
is this in Maryland or is it in DC?
Washington, DC, at Tilden Street and Beach Drive. If you go up
Yeah, I
to
know.
up Tilden, you're near Van Ness. So some years later, this is the barn. This is the building here. You can see with the black door open. At some point, it became the art barn in the 80s. Some group got a contract to run it as an art barn, and they had a gallery there. That was kind of a neat thing. And the orchard is back behind that white car, that police car, I guess, is there. So I have 27 trees. And then I started them from very small. And my mother was an artist and she exhibited there, and I thought I'd give her a shout out. So here's one of her etchings of the mill she did in the 70s. We have some another artwork of orchard artwork just for color. So this is a map of there. How about a hand?
Yeah.
This is a map published in 1861, federally chartered map, and it shows all of DC, all the properties, all the property lines, all the houses, and all the orchards, which is kind of cool. So this is Peirce Mill here, and this is Broad Branch, which doesn't really exist here. And this is the orchard in question. But it's interesting, like Blagden Street. Mr. Blagden had an orchard up here. He had another mill with Mr. Argyle up here. There are lots of mills in the Rock Creek. There were, I forget how many, 7 or 9 mills. Another interesting thing about this map, see this big orchard here? This is where Sidwell Friends is. If you ever wondered, how did Sidwell Friends get such a big piece of land in the city? It's because they probably were, I don't know if they're Quakers running it, but yeah, it was an orchard till, I don't know, at least 1860. This is a closer view. So this is the mill here. This is the carriage house, the art barn. This is my little orchard here. This is what it looked like a year after I started it. Some of my beginning cover crops. This was a couple years ago. That's what it looks like. And I was telling you earlier that one of the things I'm interested in is doing cover crops under the trees to improve the soil. So it's a little impractical. It's a very small orchard, but it just it's fun for me to practice it, but it's also fun to interpret it and to tell the public about it. You know, regenerative farming and all the benefits of growing cover crops, and you know what it does, and it's all about biodiversity and nutrient cycling and carbon capture and soil remediation and water retention and all those things. And it has worked. And for the past 8 years, I've been doing that, and the soil is dramatically improved. Some local color. And in the spring and the summer, I grow mostly flowers, cosmos, sunflowers, safflower, zinnias, some beans. So I try to have a diverse crop, buckwheat, some brassicas, daikon radish, and they all sort of work at different levels in the soil. They mine different nutrients. I mean, if you think about it, you know, if you had a 1 square meter area, and then you know, you're trying to add nutrients to it, like there's a finite amount of nutrients in that top foot, but there's an infinite number of nutrients if you went down a mile. You know, between the surface and a mile deep is unlimited nutrients. And it's just a matter of concentrating them and bringing them to the surface. And that's where the cover crop comes in. And so things like comfrey, for example, that's very good at mining calcium. And that doesn't compete with the trees because it sends down taproot. So it goes kind of straight down. You can plant it very close to an apple tree, and apple trees love calcium. So it mines calcium, brings it up into its leaves. You chop the leaves and it sort of decomposes and makes it bioavailable. Buckwheat mines phosphate. They all do something slightly different. Rye is a very deep root. Buckwheat's a shallow root. The beans are the legumes. They fix nitrogen. So instead of going out and buying, your Scott's fertilizer with your NPK, if you do all these things, it's more complicated and it's a little more work, but it's all there. It's all free. All it costs you is a tremendous amount of labor. This is an aerial view. This just gives you an idea. This is the orchard in question. This is the mill. This is the barn, the art barn. That's Tilden Street. So I have 27 trees. So this is the catalog that Joshua Peirce published for his nursery at Linnean Hill. 1824. So this is actually precedes the mill by 5 years. And what's amazing about this, I only put up a few pages of it, but there's just a tremendous number and variety of things that they were selling, which I don't understand how they did. So there's 100 kinds of apples, 50 kinds of pears, peaches, plums, apricots, nectarines, roses, evergreens, hops. It's just crazy amount of things. And I don't know if they were just middlemen, like buying from farmers out in the country and they were just bringing it in. They had their retail spot. I don't think they sold from this spot. The retail spot was at the top of Meridian Hill, the Meridian Hill Park. That was their retail spot because, anything on the other side of the creek was a huge headache to get to before the bridges. So that's like the country. So just if you went straight up 16th Street, that was really the city. And so anyway, that's where their retail was. So I just marked off a couple apples of interest. I like this one. It's called Early Clean Drinking. That's because I've learned that there was a stream in Maryland, probably somewhere in Montgomery County, called Clear Drinking Stream. And this apple, some seedling grew up near there. And it was an early apple. So it's early clean drinking apple. There's one down here called Surprise. It's a pink fleshed apple, which I'll talk about later. And that's kind of interesting. So I use this as kind of a guide of what I planted. Now, 3/4 of these trees are extinct. And some of them I'm not interested in. I'm more interested in cider varieties, and some I can't get. And some are, disease magnets and don't really want to plant those. So, so I have only some of these apples in my collection. The others are, I have British apples, I have colonial apples, I have French apples, all kinds of things. The top one here is Rhode Island Greening. It was Mr. Greening had an inn in Rhode Island, and that was a pretty popular apple. That was grown by George Washington, and it was pretty popular in the 1800s, late 1700s. Newton Pippin, which I'll talk about later. I have that. You were talking about, was it Lady Alice apple we were talking about earlier? I was confused because there's one called Lady Apple, the pomme de pie, because it's a very small, very delicate, very feminine apple. Down here, Harrison apple, I'll talk more about that. So I'm just showing you that they existed in this catalog back then in 1824. Hughes Virginia crab. That is the cider apple. So I'm just going to talk about these apples. I hope that's what the topic of the evening calls for. But Albemarle Pippin. Pick up some illustrations for the illustrators in the crowd. Do you know this artist? Yes. Albemarle Pippin was formerly called Newton Pippin, and it was a fairly popular apple from Newton, New York. Newton, New York is now where, what's it called? Not Ellsworth, Elmhurst. No. Anyway, it's Queens. It's like the heart of Queens right now. Was a beautiful orchard where this apple came from. It was called the Newton Pippin. And eventually it made its way down to Virginia, to Charlottesville, where it grew better and tasted better. And Charlottesville is in Albemarle County, so they called it the Albemarle Pippin. And Thomas Jefferson grew it quite extensively. I think also George Washington and some others. And it was a very good apple. And I'll just read this out. Originated in 1700 up in Queens. And this guy, Thomas Walker of Castle Hill. Now, Castle Hill is a famous estate down there in Charlottesville. It's like the heart of horsey country. Beautiful, pristine white fences and, manicured grass. And there's a cidery down there and an orchard on Castle Hill property. And they make a very good cider, which I think they've stopped making now, but anyway, I've been there. So Mr. Walker brought it back down there to Castle Hill, which is not far from Monticello. And then the American minister to England, Andrew Stevenson, he eventually took a barrel of these apples to England as a gift to give them to Queen Victoria, and in 1838, and she was so taken with these apples that they allowed them to be imported duty-free into England. It was one of the only things allowed into England duty-free, that they were that good. And this is England, which is apple country. Like, they got all the apples they need. And she's just like, oh, you can let those in. They were that good. Next on the list is Caville Blanc d'Hiver, the white of winter. This is if you're going to make a tart in France, the tarte tatin is the famous French tart, apple tart. You have to have this apple. It's kind of like a good Granny Smith. It's a good baking apple, very big apple. And this thing goes back to like 1500. It's a very old apple, continuously grown. And it has been used in lots of artworks. So I pulled up a few of these. There's a Cezanne with apples, a still life with apples. That's the Caville Blanc. Monet painted it. So what makes it unique is that it's very loby. It has like 60% yellowish apple with a red blush on one side where the sun hits. But it's you can see how loby these apples are, very large. Giovanni Baldoni, he painted them. There's some more. So I grow that. Harrison was the cider apple in New Jersey and New York in the early 1800s, and they grew a lot of them, millions of them. Very popular. And then eventually, towards the end of the 1800s, the temperance movement started getting going, and they were using it for cider, right? So the temperance movement started to get going. So people drank less cider. And you got immigrants, you got German immigrants who are bringing the knowledge of how to make cheap beer, beer is a lot cheaper to make than cider. So the popularity of cider started going down at the end of the century. And then with Prohibition, it just wiped it out. So anytime you grow an apple tree, you're voting, you're making a choice. And the choice is this or that, right? Would you rather, you know, Honeycrisp or Harrison? Because you can't have it all. You can only market so many and you can only sell so many. So what's it going to be? And so if you can't make hard cider, it's not that great an eating apple. You know, you rip them out and you plant what's marketable. So they ripped them out. And then along the 1970s, people started looking for it. Like that was a good apple. So they were really interested in finding it. Some guy finally found an abandoned orchard in New Jersey, found a tree. Pretty sure it was a Harrison. So got permission, took some grafts, some scions, grafted it out, checked it against all the records, you know, when did it ripen? What did it look like? You know, what was its size, its flavor, you know, how it grew and all those things. And eventually decided that this was indeed the Harrison. And that tree was cut down a year after he took, or 6 months after he took those scions. And so that was the last Harrison tree. So it went from millions to one and back again. And so then they started propagating it, and I have it, I'm growing it and have it back, and it's back. This is one that was in the catalog. Well, that's a cool story. Use Virginia crab. That was Thomas Jefferson's favorite cider apple. He said that the cider tasted like champagne. He grew a lot of it. You ever eat one fresh? It's a lot. It's super tannic, but it makes fantastic cider. So if you make cider from your apple, you know, Fuji or Gala or Honeycrisp, it's like making wine from Welch's grape juice. You know, yeah, you can do it, but a lot of what you're tasting in a Honeycrisp, for example, is texture, mouthfeel, sugar. And when you ferment something and it's juice, so first of all, there's no texture. And then when you ferment it, you ferment all the sugar out, so there's no sugar. And what are you left with? Not much. So dessert apples do not make good cider apples for that reason. Just the way Welch's grape juice does not make good wine. But something like Hughes crab is very high in tannins and acid, has all the body and structure. So you can make a single variety cider that's very good. Roxbury russet. This is the oldest named apple in the colonies. So from 1635, Roxbury, Mass, which is, you know, part of Boston. And it was, I guess, I don't know how popular it was, but, you know, in there. And then I just pulled this all up. There's Major General Israel Putnam. He was a general. He was a fighter in the Revolutionary War and the Battle of Bunker Hill. He got to be, he wasn't funny. He was enlisted at the time, and then he became a general. And he grew it. And his grandson moved to the Ohio Valley in 1796. And it says here, he brought 23 varieties of apples from Connecticut. Most of them came probably from his grandfather's farm. And it was considered a very good apple. It's a russet. So russet apples they have a skin that's, what you call it, gray or brown, like a potato, russet potato. So they're visually, depending on your visual training, it's not, particularly nowadays, it's not appealing. So that's why you never see them in the store, because they don't look good. Like a Red Delicious looks good. So people buy a Red Delicious because they look good, and then they realize it's not a good apple. And the opposite is true. They don't buy the russet because it looks bad, but it's a very good apple. And they're not, some of them aren't that tart, but they're sweet and they're nutty, and they have a lot of aroma and a lot of flavors. They're very rich. And they're good keepers. And I found this quote from Nathaniel Hawthorne in his book, The House of Seven Gables. Uncle Werner remarks, but I suppose I'm like a Roxbury russet. A great deal, the better, the longer I am kept. I can be kept. Yes. So I don't know. I don't think it's a great single variety, but it's a great in a blend because it adds a lot of richness. It might be lacking, depending on where it's grown and which ones exactly, but it can be lacking the acid needed to brighten it up. Yates is another fairly old apple I'm growing. Was the cider apple from the south, from Georgia, Fayetteville, Georgia. Those are pretty good. I've not got an apple off this tree yet. Called the Red Warrior in the south. I don't know if that's a Confederate reference or not. Golden russet. It's like the Roxbury russet. It's probably a descendant of another one called Ashmead's Kernel. Dr. Ashmead in England developed that apple. It's a pretty well-known apple. And golden russet, hard to grow, hard to get fruit. And I have not gotten a fruit on it yet, but people I know say it's amazing if you can get one. So we shall see. Maybe this year is the year. It's always this year. And if it's not this year, it's next year is the year. So that sort of brings me to the next topic, which is apple breeding, which is another topic I've gotten interested in. And I thought maybe botanists, you might be interested in breeding. Are you interested in breeding?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, then
Everything's been interesting so far.
we'll continue on this path then.
We're mostly interbreeders here.
You're what?
Not intra.
So I started doing my own little apple breeding project for sport. And so what I'm intending to do is to find an apple, red fleshed apple, a unique new red fleshed apple. So that's a thing. Apples that are red on the inside like a beet or pink. They exist. And people have been breeding with them a long time, for a couple hundred years. And one of them is called Surprise, which was also in this catalog. So it existed in 1824 at Peirce Mill. That was a pink fleshed apple. And when you open it up, it's surprise, it's pink. So I have been trying my hand at that. And I have in my collection of apples around town, which are grafted here and there in my backyard and various people's houses. I have about almost 200 varieties. And I have about 10 red fleshed apples. The problem with red fleshed apples are that they can be mealy, they can fall off the tree before they're ripe, they can be low acid or super high acid or low sugar or very small or disease magnets. So there are all kinds of problems, and people have been trying to breed good characteristics into that apple for a long time, increase the sugar, increase the size, so forth, with varying degrees of success. Like you can succeed in like, oh, great sugar, great acid, but the texture is terrible. And texture is super important. And that's why an apple like Honeycrisp is very popular, because it has amazing texture, amazing mouthfeel, the way it crunches in your mouth and cleaves and releases the juice, and the cells in the apple are very big, and so they burst in your mouth. So that's all very important. It doesn't have to do with taste, it has to do with mouthfeel. So if you have a great tasting apple that it's terrible texture, it's sort of useless. No one wants it. So that's the trick, and people have had various degrees of success. There's a guy in Switzerland who has been doing this for like 25 years, and he has about 6 apples that he's released, and they all begin with the name Red Love, and with a Greek name afterwards: Red Love Serena, Red Love Adissio, and Red Love Era, and so forth. So I have 2 of his, and I've used that. So I would consider that a fairly civilized apple, because I assume this guy has done a fair amount of work to get to that point. And then I've been crossing that with more primitive apples that have more of the red in it, maybe some negative traits. And I'm not so worried about things like texture, because I'm more interested in cider. So, yeah, I'm interested in more of the components like the tannins and the acid and all that sugar. So here is what surprise looks like. This is from 1800 when they first started introducing it. Who is this artist? Do you know this one? Stedman. So it's kind of, I have never seen one in person, but I know other apples that are similar to this, that the skin is yellow or green, and then the skin will turn pink, but the skin actually doesn't turn pink. It turns clear and the pink comes through the skin and it looks like it's a pink skin. And there's another red-fleshed apple called Otterson, which is bred in Michigan State has an apple breeding program, and they're going for these red flesh. Now, one of the points is that the red is a chemical anthrocyan, which is very, high in antioxidants. It's very healthy theoretically. One of their goals was to find apples that have the most anthrocyan per acre and make an extract. Like, you could take it as a supplement, health supplement. That was one of their goals.
So it only comes on when it's more mature, the red color. That correct? There's an anthocyanin pigments are usually developed in leaves that are turning in the fall.
The color has a lot to do with the temperature. And
Like a young, immature apple would probably not be red, right?
well, you wouldn't pick it when it's not ripe.
You don't know if it's red.
Right. Some of them are red in the beginning when
I mean, the whole
before they're ripe.
deciduous forest does it change colors.
Yeah. I have one that's pretty red right off the bat when it's unripe. Yeah. But a lot of the color is developed when you have a hot day and a cold night. And that's a problem in DC. When you have the high humidity, you have hot nights. And so the apples around here do not get nearly as red as they do like in eastern Washington. Yeah. So an elevation, so you got to get those cold nights, and that'll make the color really come through. So you can grow, exactly the same apple 100 miles south, and it doesn't get red or pink. So around here, they don't get it red or pink.
That imparts a lot of color in the juice as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're interested in.
And also there's a berry flavor. So there is a taste of strawberry, raspberry, blueberry in that red color, which is really interesting. Yeah. So it's quite cool if you can get past the bad texture. So I have Otterson, and that's supposed to be a really good cider apple. Right. So this is one of the red love apples. Probably that color is not very accurate. That's more accurate. So I have that one in my backyard, and it's pretty red.
Can you eat it right off the tree?
Yeah. Yeah. The red love ones are edible. Like, they're pretty good at eating apples. So I've used that in my little breeding project. Just another view of one. That was pretty juicy. I mean, it's very appealing. I mean, when you're breeding apples, you need to have a point to it. Like, are you trying to make another Honeycrisp? Like, maybe the world only needs one, like, so what are you adding to the world to go to all this headache? Well, people are very taken by red flesh. It's very compelling because they've never seen it. It has all kinds of interesting things to say for itself, but of course there's this other problems. So anyway, I thought I'd try my hand at that. This is Thornberry. There was a breeder in California in the 40s named Albert Etter, and he did a lot of breeding. I think he did some stone fruit too, but he also was trying red fleshed apples, and he had some success with some pink fleshed apples. He also had an apple called Wixon, which is fairly popular cider apple today. Those apples. And he has, I'm not sure how many red fleshed apples he came up with. So he died and his orchard kind of went to hell. And then some descendant discovered this overgrown orchard, and so they sort of revived it and brought them back, and now they market them, and they patented or trademarked the names. And so this is one thornberry. So I'm using thornberry because I consider that a pretty civilized apple. Like I assume had done a lot of work to get to this stage. And I grow this, and it is a pretty good apple. It's a pretty good eating apple. It's a vigorous tree, not a lot of disease, has pretty good texture. It's a good apple. So I've crossed that with Robert's Crab. Robert's Crab I would consider a primitive apple, but the color is intense. It's an amazing apple. That's one of my favorite trees. It's just terrible to eat. The texture's like wood. It's terrible, but and high in tannins. But you can taste the berry in there if you can get past the awfulness of what's in your mouth. It's really kind of interesting, and then very high sugar too. So that's important when you're making cider. You want to have enough sugar to make enough alcohol that it preserves it. Like if it's very low alcohol, your odds of it turning kind of funky are pretty high. So you need to have enough alcohol to make it last in the bottle, and then you need to have tannins is also a preservative. That's one of the reasons why beer has hops in it, because hops also has preservative qualities. It's kind of a antibacterial. So if you have enough tannins and enough acid also, and that keeps the balance of the bacteria in the cider correct, and keeps the bad yeast from forming and making off flavors. So anyway, this has got a lot of potential. So I've got these. I haven't got any apples off my breeding yet, but they're 2 years in the making. Probably another year I might get an apple. So my criteria is I want an apple that's at least the size of a golf ball. That's one of my criteria, and then the rest we'll see. But the genetics did come through, because the leaves are very red. The cambium is very red. The bark is red. It's very cool. Now the genetics are expressed, so I'm fairly confident I'm going to get something.
So these are all at your orchard, the one at Peirce?
Yeah, I have a seedling trial row amongst my other trees. That was last spring. And then that's my cider I make for fun in my basement. I call it Lady Scrumpy. Lady Scrumpy. Scrumpy is the term for very rough British West Country cider, like from Somerset and Hereford. Like everyone who's got an apple tree just throws in a barrel and just hopes for the best, puts it out in the barn, and then they, not a lot of sanitation, so it's very rough and funky. And that's called Scrumpy. But this is more sophisticated, more elevated than that. I take much more care. So this is it's Lady Scrumpy. I do.
I made beer for quite a while. So
Yeah.
You use similar yeast to, like, for wine, like grape wine?
I use a wine yeast. A lot of people, do natural yeast, which you just at the mercy of whatever's blowing in your window, which not that interested. Did it once, it wasn't good. And I had no interest in that anymore. So I try to control it. I kill the natural yeast with sulfites first and try and neutralize it. And then I add a wine yeast now.
Are cider apples is the flavor more influenced by where you grow them than like the sugary apples? Are those kind of more consistent regardless of where you grow them?
Well, you're getting into the topic of terroir.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a cider maker in upstate New York. His name is Andy Brennan. He has a label called Aaron Burr Cidery. His deal is he's a locational cider. He wants to know, to answer your question, does the cider taste different from the silty plain, halfway up the mountain, the rock ledge? And so he makes these locational ciders from wild apples he finds out in the forest, in the woods. And he's gotten a fair amount of notoriety, and he sells in New York City, and he's been on NPR and the New York Times. And he's a very interesting guy. So I have not sampled all his, so I can't say that I can tell. I've had one here and one there. But if you ask him, the answer is yes, it does affect the taste where they're growing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a very scientific test, because it's whatever tree is down there versus whatever tree is up there. It's not the same tree in different spots.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he's actually learned, but it's an interesting idea.
Back the same genetic tree.
Yeah.
Plant that.
Yeah. And so I met him, and then I asked him, like, what are your favorite cider trees that you have, and could you get me scions? And he did. And so now I'm growing them here and there.
Cool.
So I have some of his. That's a whole nother field of apple growing, is discovering wild seedlings. That's another addiction. So people go out, particularly not around here because it's not so common, but Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, there are just apple trees everywhere. And if you find one that's kind of interesting, it's extra big or extra small or extra tart or something, it's cool looking, then you can convince someone else to propagate it, and then you name it. A lot of people name them funny names or locational names, like, Motel 6 dumpster. This tree was found behind the dumpster in Motel 6 off of Route 9. So that's the Motel 6 apple. So people do that, and then they try and convince other people to grow it. And there's a guy up in Western Mass who's one of these guys. He's a orchardist, but he's also does this, and he's organized these pomological expositions. He's done it 3 or 4 years in a row now, where he gets people to submit their apples that they found and then named, and then he's a very good writer, so he has very great descriptions of the apples, and then he publishes it in this catalog. And then there's another guy in Brooklyn who's a very good photographer, like studio photographer, and he photographs these apples beautifully. And so there's like all these illustrated apples and great descriptions of all these crazy apples out there. And I've got a bunch of his apples now growing around town. Oh, it's a field that has a lot of possibilities. So I just do this for fun. So I work for Friends of Peirce Mill. I should have said this up front, who I am. I didn't really touch that. Let's start this whole thing again. So I'm a volunteer. I work with a group called Friends of Peirce Mill. We are an organization that is put together to support the mill, to raise funds and help maintain the mill and help staff the mill, because the Park Service has no money, no employees. And so back in the 80s, when I was a kid, the mill was functioning and you could go and watch them grind corn, all the time. And then in the 80s, late 80s, I think the wheel broke, the shaft broke, and that was that. The park, they're not fixing anything. So it was abandoned, more or less shuttered for 15 years. And this is the way the national park likes to handle properties like this. They try to encourage local people to start a nonprofit to help support them. So that's like Gettysburg National Park is done that way. There's a nonprofit group that raised the money to make the museum, and they run the whole park. So we're kind of like that. So we raised the money to fix the mill. We did a lot of stuff. We, did the fire suppression and water remediation and handicap accessibility and all this other stuff. And then part of that was to recreate a fraction of this orchard that was there. So that's how we operate down at the mill. And I encourage everyone to come out. We're milling corn, I think it's now twice a month, every other Saturday. and come see the mill in action. And if you've never seen it, it's very cool. It's like being inside of a giant clock, you know, when the whole building is shaking and it's all wooden gears, it's all wooden mechanisms. It's very cool to see. So, all right, we'll take questions for the hundreds of people out here in the audience.
We should check if there's any questions on them.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
people could,
That mill just turned
at the power of the.
yeah.
creek, that runs through.
Yes.
No extra.
Well, no. Yes, it's,
Shot how the rain, yeah, shot.
the mill was run by the water. There was a head race and a dam. The dam broke, you know, in the late 1800s. And so the way they did it is they made a head, not a race, it's a box. There's like a tail race box, a head race box. And by box, I mean it's a stone vat that's, you know, 50 feet long and 20 feet wide. And there's an electric pump that pumps the water from the tail race into the head race. And so the wheel is water powered, but the water is electric powered.
Right, it's about from where it comes out.
Right. Because now there's just so many rules that have to do with waterways and you know, every minute that mill is running, it's falling to pieces. And you know, every minute that you're using that head race, it's falling to pieces, and the dam is falling to pieces. So there's a tremendous amount of labor running an actual mill the old-fashioned way.
Right.
Like just keeping the dam up, you know, every time you have a flood, which happens like once a year, you know, you'd have to rebuild parts of it, and then you get a big log going down the head race, and that gets into the wheel and breaks it, you know, so you can, it's very complicated and very labor intensive to have it run properly. So this is some kind of compromise they made, shortcut. So that's how it actually functions now.
During how long an apple tree is productive?
They can go 100 years.
So did you find any old apples on all of those areas?
Not a one. I mean, it's just kind of crazy because you think how many 100 million apple cores have been flung out of car windows and park benches in the park over the last 100 years, you know? And I assume it's just the deer, just, you know, taking them out, or you know, or is it just the climate? I don't know. I don't know why it's so absent of fruit trees. There's a one pear tree up by the Klingel Mansion, which I only recently discovered. It's people have known about it for 100 years. It's a 100-year-old tree. There's records of it in old documents from 100 years ago. So it's about 3-foot diameter, but there's only about 3 inches of bark and cambium, and the whole middle is gone. It's not even rotten, it's just gone. So it's just a partial perimeter, and it can still last another 20 years. But I took scions from it this winter and grafted it out. We grafted 12 rootstocks, and we're gonna try and preserve it. I don't know what variety it is, but it's the last fruit tree in the park.
Ed, here, what kind of pest management do you do with your apples?
The ideal answer to that is IPM. You know, I tried to do the minimal amount, but and I try to be organic. So I use a variety of sprays, but I use neem oil and fish and kelp emulsion and copper sulfide, and I tried a new one. It's a biologic. It's a bacterial to try and combat my other nemesis, the fire blight bacteria. So I've
Yeah.
had
I thought
Yeah.
it'd be hard to grow apples around here with all the different creatures that might be eating them besides humans.
Yeah, then there's the squirrels and things like that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And since I'm growing in national park land, there are a lot of rules of what I can't do. So I'm handicapped by a lot of things. So I have to be careful of my overlords. Uh, but at the same time, try and make something of it. So it's a delicate balance. Another thing I use for pests is insects is Surround is the brand name. It's kale and clay. It's pottery clay. It's ground very finely into a very fine powder, and you mix it with water and spray it. And it makes a white film. It looks pretty bad. You put this white film all over the tree, and insects don't like crawling on it. It kind of gets in their orifices and their pores, and it bothers them. So it's a repellent. In it itself is inert. You know, it's like it's in toothpaste and Pepto-Bismol. It's, you know, you can eat it. It's just clay, but it's fairly effective. It's just a fair amount of labor to, you got to keep it on, and every time it rains, you got to reapply it, and you have to have a good film of it on there. But that's a good way to deal with insects.
Trees growing other places as well around.
I have some at my in-laws in Northern Virginia, and in my backyard and my neighbor's yard. I have two small trees in my backyard. Each one has 40 varieties on them. And then my neighbor's tree, which is bigger, is kind of overhanging the fence. So I got another about 35 varieties on that tree. So right there, it's over 100, and then I've got others elsewhere. So if you're good at grafting, you can just keep putting. It makes a mess of your tree, and it's very hard to keep track. And you know, because they're all flowering at different times and ripening at different times and have different problems. And if you have, you know, on one tree all these different issues, it's not a good idea. I don't recommend it, except for the fact it's really fun. So I do recommend it.
Like there's maybe a question in the chat or a comment. Let's scroll up or scroll down.
Gee, that question.
The kaolin application is frequently used for insect control in tropical botanical gardens. Well, there you go.
Okay, I had a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of curious. When I was a kid in the 70s, we were in the Finger Lakes of New York, and they had, I guess it was mostly the cherry trees or the pears that were hanging on. I think the apples probably mostly had blight or something. I think my dad ended up burning a lot of that. Kind of curious for climate, if that's affecting your choices at all.
Yeah, well, we're more southern and so more humid. So there's definitely apples that do better in the south than the north and vice versa. So things like Jonathan apple, which is pretty popular, that does not do well in the heat. So like southern Pennsylvania is like as far south as you should really try and grow something like Jonathan. But then there are lots of apples that are southern, like Stamen and Wine Sap, Arkansas Black. Some of those were all bred in the South, and so they do very well in the heat. So yeah, they definitely need to. And then there's things that are more modern, you know, that people didn't have this problem before. Like there's a bug called the plum curculio, which is the nemesis of stone group fruit growers. But it's only, I don't know when it was, 50 years ago that the plum curculio figured out that apples are pretty tasty too. So why limit themselves to just plums? So that is a problem insect now that people didn't have 150 years ago. There's a fungus called apple cedar rust, which was a terrible problem long time ago. In fact, so it's a fungus that grows on the cedar trees, and it jumps from the cedar to the palm tree, palm fruit, and then back again. So it has to sort of complete this cycle. And it was such a problem that in Pennsylvania, which is a big apple growing place, it was illegal to have a cedar tree on your property. It was actual law. And they're pretty common. They're common in the park, so it's a problem. But there are fungicides that take care of it pretty easily. So that is a problem I don't have because I sprayed that.
You commented about the russets and the texture of the skin. What was the pippin? Because lots of varieties are named pippin.
The question is about pippins. What does pippin mean, or where does that come from? So pippin means it's the seed, it's the seedling. So I mean, it's a little unclear because all apple trees came from a seedling. So every apple is a pippin. Or maybe I think it's to cut it a little more finely. If you're intentionally breeding something, it's not a seedling. Like a seedling is something you might find accidentally, I think. I think that's more what they mean. So there are many synonyms for that. There's seedling. So there's Bramley's seedling. That's a famous British apple. There's the Albemarle pippin. So that's another synonym for seedling. There's kernel. The kernel, the seed, so Ashmead's kernel. Then the French have got a word, rennet. And so there's the rennet, the Orleans rennet. Rennet means rebirth, like Renaissance. So it's the coming again. That's like a new variety. It's a seedling. So there, is there another one? So there are different ways of describing a seedling.
So I was thinking through all of this, especially your breeding of those red apples, how much quantitative trait loci sequencing and profiling is done on behalf of the community of apple growers to achieve these varieties? Is there 23andMe for your apples?
That went out of business.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes. I think in Washington State there is, I don't know if they're private or government, and they will do a genetic ID of your apple.
Yeah.
I think it's not common. I don't know if they'll do anybody or if you got to be someone special. In England, I believe anyone can get it done for like, 40 or 80 pounds or something. But here it's not generally done, because that's a question many people have is, what kind of apples growing in my backyard? How do I find out? And without genetic information, there are lots of clues and lots of ways to find out, but it's very difficult. And so there are not many people who either, I don't think they have access to that easily. It's my understanding.
the infrastructure and scientific establishment's just not there. They don't have the databases and libraries to search against.
I think there are some, but it's not easily accessible.
Would it help?
Sure. I don't know apple breeders do certain things, like they're interested in disease resistance. So they will, infect the apples with a disease, like 10,000 of them, and see which ones drop dead. So then they can sort of weed them out that way. But doing it, and I think there are ways. There's one, there's a consortium of breeders called the PRI, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana. They've joined together, and they've been breeding apples, and they came up with one that has this thing called the VX gene, which is a apple scab resistant gene in it. And I think they can test for that gene. So if they want that gene to go forward, then they'll have 10,000 seedlings out there they can test and see if it's in there, and then they'll like wipe out the rest, and we'll continue with that line. So I don't know that much. That's all I know. They have a line of fruit that's gotten pretty popular. So all their fruit has the letters PRI in it. So Enterprise, Williams Pride, Pristine. Those are three off the top of my head that have the PRI gene and the PRI letter in them.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Gold Rush is, I think, has it in it also. That's a fairly popular apple. That's a very good apple.
Like there might be another question.
Question. What is a good place to purchase these unusual red-fleshed apple varieties? Well, if you want an apple tree, you have to go to a nursery, and I haven't checked, but some of them have some. The nurseries that I've dealt with are Cummins, which is in Ithaca, New York. There's Adams County Nursery, which is in Adams County, Pennsylvania. Stark Brothers down south. Those are just some nurseries. I don't know. You have to check. You might be able to find some pink-fleshed apples at least. There's some popular ones like Pink Pearl or Mott's Pink, or what are the other pink ones that are fairly popular? Anyway, there are a few out there. Pink Lady is not pink on the inside. No.
Cornell used to have lots of very small departments, including the department of homology,
Yeah.
but they all got merged into botany department.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Well, Cummins Nursery, Mr. Cummins was the head of, I think, the pomology part of Cornell. He's done a lot, and they've done a lot to develop rootstock. That's another important part. And they're developing those in Geneva, which is part of the USDA. Yeah, the GRIN, the GRIN, the genetic repository. So they have, I was telling them earlier, I don't know, tell me if you know all this already. You guys are the experts, but if you want to continue a line of apples, Honeycrisp or whatever, you have to graft it. You can't just plant the seed. So like you have seed banks for wheat and whatever, your grasses. Don't get me started on grasses. You can't have a seed bank for apples. You have to have the tree bank, the living thing. Scion. So, I mean, if you go to Home Depot and buy a Honeycrisp tree, it's grafted to a rootstock.
You're right.
They're all grafted. Yeah.
You mean it's us? Yeah.
Yeah. But you graft it to a rootstock because the rootstock has beneficial properties to it. When you plant a seed, you get what you call a seedling tree. And a seedling tree generally is a giant tree. It's a big tree, like it can be 30 feet, 40 feet tall. And nobody wants a 40-foot tall apple tree. It's nothing but trouble. You can't pick it, you can't prune it, you can't spray it. It's a hassle. So you graft onto a dwarfing rootstock, and so the rootstock controls its size. So do you want a small, medium, large tree? And then they also have beneficial properties of disease resistance and so forth.
I mean,
And that's what they're doing in Geneva. So there's a whole line now of Geneva rootstocks that are relatively modern. The British did a ton of research on rootstocks in the 1910 to 1920s around World War I, and they was a whole national effort to sort of make England the apple country, and it was done in mauling, and so they have the letter M in front of their numbers, M111, the M27. So they're still fairly popular today, the mauling line of rootstocks. But the people at Cornell have been working on that, and they've come up with the line of Geneva ones, and they're superior.
So I was out at Seed Savers in Iowa. Do they do open pollination? Does anybody do open pollination of apple trees or not? I believe theirs were considered heirloom, but I don't know. Sounds.
I mean, you can, I mean, depends on what you're trying to achieve. It works.
Sell the seeds or sell, rootstock or whatever, seed savers. It's just seed banking, but it's like heirloom, varieties of a whole bunch of things. And he had an orchard out there.
Well, when you open pollinate it, it's whatever the mother is by question mark.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's sort of interesting to somebody, but not to that many people. Right. So you haven't really saved anything by doing that. You're getting something unique. If you're trying to get something similar, you might, but right.
Yeah. Let's see.
I mean,
I think they're trying to save certain varieties.
well, you have to do it by grafting, by cloning it. That's the only way. No. As I was saying earlier, that, every Macintosh tree in the world that ever existed came from one tree up in Ontario. From Mr. Macintosh's backyard. It just grew up, and so they propagated it, and it's now every Macintosh tree that ever has existed goes back to that one tree. And the only way you do that is by cloning it, by grafting. And that's how every named apple works. So if you want a Granny Smith, you have to clone it. If you don't really care and you just throw some Granny Smith seeds in the ground, you may get one that's pretty close to Granny Smith, but it won't be a Granny Smith. It may look identical, may taste identical, but genetically it won't be it. And odds are that it won't be that identical. Because apples are heterozygous like humans. How we don't look like our siblings and we don't look like our parents, and everyone that's ever existed is a unique individual with a unique set of genetics that have never existed before. So if you want another you, you're going to have to clone you. That's the only way.
More questions? Let's give Tim a round of applause.
Well, in closing, just come by the orchard sometime, or give me a ring on the telephone, and we'll give you a tour, or just go to the mill on milling day, or come walk around. It's very pretty.
Sounds great. Cool.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you tell us something more about the Gold Rush apples? Because they're the most amazing apples I've ever tasted. Like you had described another apple that has large cells that explode in your mouth with the sweetness and tartness, and that's what a Gold Rush does.
Well, I think it was developed by Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, and it's just a very good all around apple. It's pretty good for baking. It's pretty good for cider, and it's pretty good eating right out of hand. So it's a real workhorse. So that's about all I can say about it. It's good sugar acid balance, and then as it ages, it stores well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you'll find them, like my farm market guy, he has an orchard up in Pennsylvania. He'll have them in I think they're starting this Saturday, the first outdoor farm market in my neighborhood. And he'll have Gold Rush from last fall. They ripen in September, October, late October. And he'll have them next week because they store really well. And as they age, there's kind of a vanilla flavor that starts coming on, which is kind of interesting. The acid drops and this vanilla flavor comes out. You were asking about the hours of the mill. The mill isn't, but you can walk around. The orchard has a deer fence around it, and you can go in anytime. It's always open. There's a website, Friends of Peirce Mill has a website about the mill, and we have events. You should become a member. I didn't say that. Oh my God, so many things I didn't do. I gotta work on this lecture. This is no good. But we have memberships, and with your membership, you get invited to different events. We have cider tasting. We had a wassail event in the orchard. We had Morris dancers last month. We have a variety of, we're trying to think of having maybe a harvest meal this fall. So become a member and you'll get to help support the mill.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.